All right. Pat, how's it going?
Doing well, Mike. How about you?
Good. I appreciate you doing this. I know we're very good friends, but I think also you have established yourself pretty well so far in the baseball community. And as my first guest on the podcast, I'm grateful that it's you. So
Of course.
um,
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
absolutely. So with that, obviously, you've really gotten your feet pretty darn wet as a player, and now you're just starting to get your feet wet as a coach. So I'd love to first start out as, sort of asking you questions about your career as a player. And in particular, I was thinking we could kind of start with your junior year, getting hurt, transitioning into senior year, and obviously you going crazy. So if you could do that, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if we think back to junior year, you're talking more the in season, right? Junior year.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Thinking back to junior year, I mean, it was the first year that as a Skidmore club, we started to get back on an upswing, and so we started to win some baseball games. We started to put a team together that looked like it could really be something. And we had the talent and the for the first time in a long time, the mentality as a team, I would say, the group mentality to be able to do something. Obviously, it didn't work out. We made it to the last weekend and ended up losing some games against Rochester. And I believe it was the Union game about 2 weeks before that was when I tore my meniscus in my knee. And that it was such a weird feeling that day, because I remember we also came back from down 7-5 or something in the last inning, put up a big 5-run inning, and had this wild comeback on Union's Field, and then all of a sudden a slider in the dirt, a horrible pitch to swing at. My cleat got stuck, and
Your knee was gonna go anyways.
so I was told. The doctor
Yeah.
told me it's a degenerative tear, but
Yeah.
it was one of those. It was a rough feeling. It's one that as an athlete, that there are certain pains that you can play through. So like you foul a ball off your shin, that's gonna hurt really, really bad. But like eventually it's gonna be fine. It's just gonna bruise up. You're good to go. And the best way I can describe the knee was that it was a pain that wasn't crazy bad. It was just something that like I knew.
Wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is not something that you can just walk off and,
Right.
and be okay with. So
Now,
anyway,
let me pause you for a second. Where was your head at? What was the time between that and going to the doctors, and what was sort of going through your head?
I was just I think I was just praying that, well, first of all, I was just praying that it wasn't anything really significant and that I could be back on the field and 100% within a couple of
Even though
days.
you sort of knew that it was
Right,
pretty hurt.
right.
Yeah.
And I think I finally started to feel a little bit better with all of that when team doctor came in about 2 days after I had actually injured my knee. Because our trainer looked at it and he said, I think you tore your meniscus. I'm also a little bit worried about ligament structural damage. So you cannot play. That was the next day. He came in the morning. He said, you absolutely cannot play today. And you're going to see the team doctor on Monday, who's going to check it out. And we're going to go from there. The thing that started to make me feel better was the team doctor came in, took a look at my knee, and he said, I'm not worried about ligament damage, which is really cool. Because I knew as an athlete, if that was an ACL or if that was something along those lines, that was going to be 9 months, and I wasn't going to play again that year for sure. And then I think it was by the time my injury finally got diagnosed as a torn meniscus, and it was just a torn meniscus, partially torn. I was going to require some surgery. Yeah. It wasn't anything unexpected. Like I said, our trainer had told me, he had prepped me. Mark told me that it was going to be probably a meniscus tear. And he was on. Our doctor took a look at the MRI, said it was a meniscus tear. It was going to require some surgery, and probably looking at like a 4 to 8 week. It ended up being, I think, 6 or 7, if I'm not mistaken, but a 4 to 8 week timetable. So the mentality at that point was like, I just want to be able to play. I think it's something that has become such a cliche in sports. It's like, play like it's your last game, play like you'll never be able to play again. And it's something that I always liked to think that I did in my mind, go out and practice, go out and play like this will be your last game. But it's something that never really clicked fully in my head until that day. that I tore my meniscus and that Mark, our trainer, told us that there might be ligament damage. It never really landed in my mind. That was like, this can be taken away from you. It can be, and you can go out against Union unexpectedly. You can have the craziest comeback win in the world. Everybody's on top of the world, and then all of a sudden, because you swing at a bad pitch or because you just got your spike caught, or whether it was going to happen anyway, like it can be taken away from you like that.
Right.
And so that was the moment that really started to click. That's where my mind went.
Yeah, and it's funny. I actually started recording the second episode of this channel the other day, and I started talking about that story because we had this conversation, and I decided, you know what, instead of that, let me just pick your brain about it. So there's actually there's a theory that we've talked about, terror management theory. I'm very new to it, but someone at Skidmore teaches it, Dr. Solomon, like I said, and it's about anxiety provoked by the inevitability of death. But I sort of saw it. I see an overlap in the way athletes handle the end of their career, or like the potential of it ending due to injury, or just like being a senior and graduating.
Right.
And I think there's one of two ways that athletes tend to take that realization. It's like, go out and put a ton of pressure on yourself because it has to be the season that you need it to be, because it's going to end soon. Or what you did, which is the way more healthy way to go about it, I would say, is be grateful and focus on the process, like have fun throughout it. So like, why do you think that is where your mind went, instead of just being like, oh crap, I gotta really like perform, like this is my last season? And so why'd you take that path?
Yeah, for sure. I think it goes back to, like I just said, the realization that it can be taken away from you at any moment. And so something I know we've talked about many times is during my rehab, I went home in the summer. I had to skip the whole summer season, so that was tough. But I made sure that I dedicated everything I had in me to rehabbing my knee. And so it started really slow. Surgery hit. I was able to stretch out my knee. I could walk up and down stairs for a little bit, and then I could do push-ups. That was my workout for about a week or 2 weeks. And then it progressed to, I could do like some banded strength stuff, and then I could do some like light jogging stuff and riding a bike and do all these types of things. And by week 6 or 7, which at that point felt like a year, my trainer, my physical therapist, finally told me that I could go start sprinting and start taking BP packs, all of it. And there was one day, the first couple of days I started my sprint program, I felt really good. I'm like, cool, this felt fine. My knee feels great. I feel like I'm 100%. I'm good to go. And then there was like the third or fourth time out there, I did my first couple sprints and it felt fine. And then I did my third and fourth sprint, and I started to feel something again, right in the front of my knee, right where I just had my surgery. And I knew it wasn't the stitches. It wasn't any scarring. It was like the knee was hurting again.
Yeah.
And I remember bursting into tears on that field, and just like, I don't know if anybody who's listening to the podcast is spiritual, but I was just remember praying to God and just saying, like, I really don't care if I end up, to hyperbole here, but if I end up in a wheelchair after my senior year, I don't care if I can never walk again. I don't care if you have to cut off my knee and replace it right after the season. I don't really care. Yeah. I just want to play one more year. That's it. You just get me to the end of May, and that's it. I'll never ask for anything again. And luckily it all worked out. Like the pain was just very temporary, and my rehab went fine after that. The swings felt good when I progressed to those. Sprints were great. Catching, crouching, blocking, all of it was great.
I'd say 402. You could define that as it worked out.
The knee felt a lot better, and a lot of credit to my physical therapist for that one, because I had some big time strength and flexibility issues that I hadn't worked out or hadn't really even found until I started.
And probably working out in a different way like that, focusing on flexibility and a different type of strength. It is something that probably helped the rest of your body, not just your knee as well.
Big time.
So it's funny you bring up religion and God. And to anyone listening, this is not me trying to change anyone's personal view of themselves or life or whatever, but in terror management theory, I was listening to a podcast with Dr. Solomon from Skidmore,
Mhm.
and he suggested 3 ways that people deal with their anxiety of the end. And the first is spirituality and religion. So, it helps you believe in, the end isn't the end, and ultimately there's something to work for and to live for. And so you'll see in a lot, I mean, especially baseball, I would say, you see a lot of guys that are really religious, and it's like part of the culture. And like, you see guys on the podium afterwards, saying it's not me, it's God. And they do the the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit right before they're at bat, whatever it may be. So anyways, and then the second way is considered, or I guess that spirituality and religion is the second way. The first way is the unhealthy way, which is sort of getting bogged down in an unhealthy culture. So like,
Mhm.
the example he gives is like people tranquilize themselves with the trivial of their culture. So, you see the end of your life as an impending anxiety provoking issue. So what you do is get super invested in things that are unimportant so that you don't have to think about it. So, he says, the average person is either drinking, watching television, or shopping. He's like, that's all the same shit. It's just distracting yourself from the real issues in the world and your mortality.
Right.
So I think as an athlete, that can also be true, especially if you've gotten injured. You can really go down the wrong path pretty easily if it's too overwhelming for you, if it's too scary.
Right.
And then the third way, which is, so again, spirituality and religion would be considered one of the positive ways. The third way I'd say is also what you did, in combination with talking to God. It's accepting the uncertainty of the future. And so he says that there's a difference between saying like, I know it's going to end one day, and realizing it could end right now. Like, that's a big difference, because we can all say at some point, yeah, I know my career is going to end at some point. But
Right.
I think you had that reality check, like, no, dude, like, it could happen now. And that probably made you a whole lot more mindful and present while you were playing, which, as we know, is like, I'd say one of the number one components in performing at the top of your field, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so easy when to that theory when you were thinking about, yeah, I know my career will end at some point. I know it's down the road. I know all these things, and I think that's a mentality or a coping mechanism. I don't know if that would be the right word there.
Could
That
be.
I took into, yeah, that I took into my first 3 years at Skidmore. It was like you get really frustrated with yourself when you're not living up to these expectations, right? These numbers or this level of performance that you can hit, you're just not doing.
Right.
I think that going back to that injury, that kind of all wiped it away. My senior year is this realization that like you get a spike caught, for lack of a better way to think about it. You get a
Yeah.
spike caught in the turf, and you are done. There
Yeah.
is no tomorrow. There is no I'll get them next time.
Right.
There's no there's none of that. And so it was really, really helpful in being able to forgive myself and being able to
Mm.
enjoy the senior season that I had, is that I could go out and strike out and look stupid on 3 straight sliders, and I couldn't pick up any one of them for whatever pitcher I faced that day. And I could go back to the bench, and instead of slamming my helmet and throwing things like I would have the first 3 years, now all of a sudden I'm feeling like, well, I'm gonna have a next at bat.
Yeah.
I'm good to go. I didn't hurt my knee there. I'm good to go. I have my senior year. I have this gift of today. And so why would I go back to the dugout and be upset about what just happened when there's a possibility that I couldn't be here today, that I don't even get to have the chance to strike out and look stupid on 3 straight sliders, that I don't even get the chance to listen to my walk-up song, to listen to music on the way out of the field, or to have the chill in my bone of being on a baseball field on a Saturday or Sunday morning in the freezing Skidmore cold.
Yeah, there's
I,
nothing like it.
right. And so
um,
if you can put your head into a space where you realize and wholeheartedly understand that it is an absolute privilege to be here right now, then there's no opportunity even to feel negative about what you do on the field, because everything's a positive from there.
Right. So you were able to really control your perspective, and you were mindful enough to be able to take a step back in those moments. And
Right.
honestly, that probably is what helped you move on to the next play so well. Because as we know in baseball, if you're thinking about, what you did in the field while you're at the plate, you're not gonna make contact. I promise you that. So, or vice versa. So that's a really good segue, Pat. I wanted to sort of get into, so okay, I already introed you, but in summary, you All-American, 402 home run record for a single season, all the hoopla about you, which is well deserved. Obviously, you're one of the hardest working guys I know. And now as a coach, to transition here, you talk about forgiveness, and to me that sort of screams like self-compassion. And I was listening to an interview with Steve Kerr today. He talked about the Warriors' 4 values that they try to embody every day in everything they do, and one of them is compassion and the other is joy. So I think you and I would both agree that coaches as a whole don't always come from that standpoint. Just as an example, I think a lot of coaches sort of look at the outcome of a game or a practice or whatever and determine whether or not it was successful. And
Right.
so a lot of values are centered around like how hard can you work, how much can you push through your pain, how gritty can you be, and a lot of those things have their place. But Steve Kerr like revolutionized the NBA by taking, and coaching, I would say in general, by taking what has always been sort of like I don't want to use the word masculine, but like a real like hard-nosed toughness approach where you have to like fight through crap as opposed to being successful through positivity.
Right.
And in studying sports psych for a couple of years, we learned that it's outdated. People perform better when they're relaxed and they know their coach and their teammates have their back. And when you're coaching, your teammates have your back, you can have your own back much easier. So that self-compassion was probably huge for you. So as a coach, how do you implement those values in a sport, in a culture that has traditionally been hard-nosed, like you get yanked out of the lineup if you're not having a good game, and so you get down on yourself, and then the pressure rises, anxiety, cortisol, all that jazz. So how do you do that as a coach now?
I think it's an interesting balance. And so first and foremost, having that grit and grind, having that hard-nosed approach to your game, and having that toughness mentally and physically in your game is something I don't think you can substitute. And so for all of the idea that compassion and forgiveness and all these things are beyond important, like you cannot succeed without them. You're absolutely right about that.
Yep.
I think they're not mutually exclusive. You can be physically, mentally tough. You can be grit and grind type of team while also being really joyful, having a lot of fun, having forgiveness and compassion for yourself. If you make an out, if you make an error, if you overthrow a ball, if you walk a guy, if you walk a run home, whatever the case is. So first and foremost, I think it's important to recognize that those aren't mutually exclusive ideas. They can certainly work in concert. And I think it's difficult to say how exactly to implement that in a team. And I'm certainly new to the process as it is already. But I think the biggest thing that we're always told, and I don't want to sound too cliche again, because everybody always says, trust the process, trust the process.
Yeah.
It gets really old to hear that. And when people say those things to you, they rarely ever explain what they mean by that. And so one of the best ways it was ever broken down was Coach Florida and Coach Mick brought us in. I think it was my junior year, so I think you were there, although it could have been my senior year too. And they broke up stats for our pitchers and our catchers for one of the meetings into result stats and process stats. Result stats are your ERA, your WHIP for pitchers. For hitters, it's your batting average, the number of home runs you have, RBIs, runs, all of it. All of the stats that you see and that people love to focus on are your result stats.
Right.
Process stats are things for pitchers. You're talking like your walks. That's something that you can control. How many strikes number of first pitch strikes you throw.
Right.
Percentage of curveballs and fastballs for strikes. That's things that are under your control. For hitters, pitches that you chase out of the zone, or first pitch fastballs that you swung at, things like that. And while that broke it down in a way that was really, really cool to think about, it's also cool to think about breaking that down even further.
Yeah.
And so now we're one step removed from, let's take ERA as a pitcher. We're one step removed from ERA when we talk about first pitch strike percentage, because ERA can't control most of the time, or a lot of the time, we can't control our ERA directly, but a lot of the time we can control the first pitch strike percentage. If we remove that even further, your first pitch strike percentage can be broken down into another process that says, did I just breathe before the first time I faced this batter? Did I breathe? Did I count my inhale? Did I count my exhale? Did I visualize exactly where I wanted that ball to go? Did I see the spin of the ball in my own mind? Did I talk to myself while I was throwing that pitch and say nothing but positive things? So like if my cue that day was that my front side was flying a little bit open, and I wanted to just remind myself to say smooth through the plate. If I just use the word smooth in my mind, smooth. Yes. If I'm a hitter and I over rotate my front shoulder and I want to use the word open, free, something like that to give myself a good opportunity to succeed at that point. I think that's where the art of coaching really comes into play. And I think that's one of the things that is really important to instill in players, is that when a guy is going bad, when a guy is taking bad swinging at bad pitches, missing the pitch that he should be hitting hard, not recognizing a curveball, breaking it back down to a process stat. And so if a guy comes up to me and says something along the lines of like, coach, you see anything I'm doing wrong? Like, what's going on? I feel like my stride's a little off. I feel like I'm rotating. I feel like I'm doing this, and this. I don't want to talk about it though, until we get to let's check off box number 1. Were you breathing that at bat? Did you count your inhale and your exhale?
Right.
And right after that, go back to that visualization side. Go back to the positive self-talk side of things. Go back to everything that says, did you give yourself the best chance to succeed? Take away anything physical, take away anything in your batting stance, in your swing, in what the pitcher did, anything external. And just think, did I give myself the best opportunity to succeed in that at bat? And if the answer to that question is no, like you weren't doing your breathing, you weren't visualizing the right way, you weren't giving yourself the positive thoughts that you needed, then we shouldn't worry about the physical side yet. Because we can make somebody could have a swing as pretty as Josh Donaldson or Jose Bautista or Ken Griffey. It doesn't matter if you don't think that you're going to succeed, and if you don't give yourself the best chance to succeed.
I love it.
The plate.
I love it. And I think that's a testament to likely what you did for yourself your senior year. So I have 2 directions I want to go here, and I'm not sure where to go first. Let's go with, what were some of the key features, the key mental skills that you used your senior year that made you have such a prolific season that really maybe you weren't doing earlier in your career? And obviously you had an awesome first few years for someone who is is in college baseball, and from at a school that hasn't traditionally done well in the league, at least over the past several years, and you just step into this position of starting catcher and have great seasons, but you really All-American is another level, I would say. So what really amped that up for you?
I think we've had this conversation a few times, and I really did not change much physically. I think like I talked about earlier, I got a little more flexible, a little stronger in certain areas physically, but my swing, thinking about my swing from my first 3 years to my senior year, I didn't mess with it much. And I think the skills that it broke down to were really all mental. And I tried to do 3 things every at bat that I talked about, that I would ask our players now. But the first thing I did was that in between every pitch and before every at bat, and this actually started in the on deck circle, I would look at the back left hand corner of the plate. And it doesn't actually have to be that. It could be any spot from what I've heard from sports psychologists. But I used to look at the back left-hand corner of the plate and inhale for 3 through my nose and exhale for 4 through my nose in between every single pitch. So first and foremost, that was extending my exhale. And so that's something that that I know that we talked about a lot my senior year. And I know that Dr. Tiff preached to us was extending your exhale tends to slow your heart rate. And so extending my exhale for 4 seconds, I felt like it slowed my heart rate enough to reset my mind and to get back in the box. The second thing I did along with that was the visualization side. I felt like I was the type of hitter, and I really do think as a hitting coach, this comes into play a lot. If you are thinking that you want to take a fastball to the middle opposite field gap, right to center field or to the opposite field side of whatever side you hit off the plate, then you will be on time for almost every single pitch in college, at least, because there are very few pitchers who are going to overpower you with a crazy hard fastball. And if you are already thinking pull on a fastball, well, then you're going to be way out in front of anything off speed, curveball, changeup, whatever it is. But if you are thinking middle oppo fastball and you get off speed, then all of a sudden you can work through a baseball still, or you can let your hands stay back and you can still put that ball in fair territory and get a good piece of it. Sorry, that was a but what I used to do is I used to visualize in my mind a batting practice line drive over our second baseman's head. So with the backspin in mind, with the fact that with the feel of it off the bat, with the sound in my ear, I would try to remember the trajectory of a rising line drive over our second baseman's head.
I love that.
Yeah, so that was number 2. That got me thinking kind of externally, which I thought helped a lot, because now it did the first 2 things that I did, and really the third thing that I'll get into in a second, they not only centered my brain and focused it on being relaxed and being present in that moment for that at bat, but it didn't give me time to guess on other things. It didn't give me time to worry about whether my feet were set the right way or like what mechanical thing was going on with my swing that day. It didn't give me time to think about whether a curveball or a fastball or a changeup was coming, what the pitcher was going to call, what the catcher was thinking. It didn't give me time to think of any of it. It just had me focus on these things. So I'll go back. Breathing in for 3, out for 4, visualizing a line drive over our second baseman's head. And then the third thing I did was I had some sort of word cue that I put in my head every game. And it changed depending on the day. There were some times that I thought my top hand would get a little lazy. And so my cue for that day would just be top hand, top, or something along those lines. I would just say it, just mumble it under my breath, top, top, top. There would be some times where I thought I was over rotating and I needed to keep my front shoulder open. And so I'd just say open, open, something like that. There would be some days where I just thought, like, let's just swing hard today. Maybe there's not a flaw in my swing today. So that I would just say the word hard, swing hard, swing hard. And so again, all of these things.
Those are pretty good days. Those are good days when you can walk up and say, hey, nothing's wrong.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Just swing hard. Just let it fly. So again, all 3 of those things I credit with not only taking my focus away from negatives, but actively putting it into something positive. So the actively thinking of one thing prevented me from thinking about something I didn't want in my mind.
Yeah. I would also say, just from talking with you after, throughout your season, you were a big decompress guy. Like, you took time after games to work through what happened and flush it. And that is, I'd say that's such a crucial period for an athlete, is how you going to rest and bounce back, rest your mind and rest your body. Because if we can't recover, then we can't learn, and we're not going to be ready for the next game. And I think you put a lot of time aside for that, which was awesome. So what I'm noticing about your three things, they're all 100% controllable, right? So what do you say to an athlete who is maybe struggling and is, unfortunate as it is, and this is where I think some coaches are better than others. There are coaches out there who maybe leading up to the season will preach process, but it's hard for them to continue focusing on someone's process if they're struggling at the plate. Like I think just from experience, I think a lot of coaches will like preach process, and then game one happens, say a guy goes over 3 with 3 Ks. Then suddenly they're saying you're cocking your bat too much, you're wrapping your bat around your head, or try opening your stance, and suddenly they're out of the process mindset. So for as a coach, how do you remind yourself of that, like, when you're really getting into the emotion of it? And also, what do you say to a player who's like struggling to, like, yeah, okay, Coach Pat, like, I understand the process, but like, that's a hard thing to buy into. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, sure, you can send them all these articles ever. Like, the science does say you're more likely to have a successful outcome if you don't focus on it, if you focus on the process. But you can say that till you're blue in the face. Hard to get someone to buy into that. So, like, how do you really push that until it's like a team-wide culture, team-wide value to be process oriented?
I think that's fair, and I think it's again, I've said it a few minutes ago. It's a tough balance, especially as a coach. At the end of the day, you need to put the best product on the field, and so it's really difficult. Here's where it gets difficult to marry that Steve Kerr joyous and compassionate approach with the pretty hard work approach, and you can marry them, but it's hard.
Right.
So at the end of the day, you have to put the best product on the field. And so if someone is just not performing and not getting the results, even as much as we hate to focus on those, we can't have that person in the lineup. We can't, because our job is to win games. It's about the thinking backwards part of that and focusing on the process part of that eventually results in winning games. But I think a lot of building that in players has to do with the culture that already exists around you. And so you're right. It's beyond difficult to convince a player who is over their last 15 that as long as they're breathing, as long as they're visualizing, like, it will come. It's difficult to tell a player who has not hit for 4 or 5 games that they're doing all the right things, because it never feels that way in your mind. Here's where I think that comes down to building that from the ground up and building that in all of your players. I think it is easy for a player to get down on themselves, period. But it is especially easier for one of our guys to get down on himself if our captains are striking out in a big spot, coming in and firing their helmet against the bench.
Right.
Being real negative, being like, God, I suck at this game right now. I can't hit shit. Whatever. If that's what our captains are doing, if that's what our coaches are doing, you can even take it from that approach right now. If our coaches are having something as small as a bad day throwing BP, plenty of times I've had a bad day throwing BP. If I'm sitting there, I'm like cursing up a storm, I'm going to fire my fungo against the wall. If I'm going to fire a bucket of baseballs because I'm pissed off that I can't throw a strike that day, that's contagious. And that again preaches that results mindset versus a process mindset. And so it is especially difficult to tell any of our guys that the process that they're focused on is the more important one than the result that they're focused on, especially if the people that they are looking at on a day-to-day basis don't also feel that way.
Yeah.
But I think it's much easier to sell that. And I say sell as if it's something that we're faking. It's not. We know that from a sports side perspective. Like you said, this is the right way to go about things, focusing on stats and focusing on what you can
No,
control.
but creating buy-in is crucial as a sports psychologist, but also as a coach.
Right. And so the easiest way to sell that is when the guy next to you who is going on a 10 for 15 tear with 5 extra base hits while you're on your 0 for 15 slump is still striking out and feeling okay and not throwing his helmet against the wall. And the guy who's going 10 for 15 with all his extra base hits is talking about how much this breathing is helping him, or staying as centered, as calm as you can. Your coaches who are setting the lineup every day and who are throwing BP every day are practicing this too. Your coaches are going through breathing. Your coaches keep asking your players the right questions. Whether it's like, I'm struggling right now. What am I doing wrong? Are you breathing? Are you visualizing? Are you positive self-talking right now? Where's your mind at? I think it is not an easy thing to sell in a moment, but it is an easy thing to make a habit with your team. And so you can't make a case and just sell it to someone who is down on themselves for an 0 for 15, 0 for 20 slump. You can't. It's not possible. But the habit of looking back inside yourself and saying, I'm 0 for 15, but that's okay. It really is, because tomorrow I'm going to go 1 for my next one. Or if I'm not, I'm going to go 1 for my next one after that, because I'm focusing again. When we break it down a little bit further, I'm going to be able to breathe fine. I'm going to relax. My heart rate's going to be slow. I'm going to know exactly where I want this ball to go when I hit it. I want that backspin scud missile right over the second baseman's head. Yep. And I'm going to hear the words and hear the cues that I'm going to hit myself with to be able to do it. And if I don't do it, that's okay, because my teammates still have my back. My coaches still have my back. They all love me and they want me to succeed. And it's okay.
Dude, I can't even tell you how much of that resonated with me. I think that's so. One thing that I'm loving about this is you almost have like an order of operations. It sounds like you first go, all right, did you control your controllables and do your mental skills, or I guess not even skills necessarily, like mental habits, I would say. Human habits that help us, then you're like, okay, now let's talk about hitting and what you might be able to do. But also what you're making me think of with the habits, because you're right, when someone's 0 for 10, you're not going to be able to suddenly create immense buy-in into like process orientation. But I heard this quote the other day by it might have been David Goggins, the Navy SEAL. Now he's got a different philosophy, and I don't agree with everything he says, but he did say something that stuck out to me. A big piece of sports psych is motivation. Maybe the motivation to do your breathing, the motivation to visualize and focus on that. But it's a whole lot easier to be motivated when things are going well. It's a whole lot easier to go back to work when you're making more money, closing deals maybe as a salesperson. But so Goggins' quote was, motivation comes and goes. So, but it's really not as important as discipline, because if you're on a day where you're extremely unmotivated, but you're still executing the same habits, like what you just said, that's when you're going to make real change. Because if you're only involving yourself in those process oriented habits, breathing, when things are going well, you're failing yourself, because you're not always going to have the same level of motivation every time you wake up. And I thought that was awesome. And I thought you actually described that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard that quote too, this idea of being disciplined enough to build those habits. And that's where that word habit comes in. And actually made me think of 2 more quotes that I know we've talked about too. One that I heard a long time ago that I absolutely loved was, how you do anything is how you do everything. And so to think about this way, and the second quote that I heard, and I think I actually might have heard this from you, was somebody once said there are 3 aspects to the work that you can do. It's what you're doing, who you're doing it with, and how you're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I might have heard that one from you. But it's made me think a lot, especially recently, about that third aspect of it, the how you are doing it.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing about baseball and the beautiful thing about college sports in general is that it if done properly can build these habits forever, to the point where you are always going to be focused on, if your coach and all the people around you keep focusing on process, on sports psych, on mental skills and habits and mindfulness and all of these, being disciplined, to your point about God, about completing these things, that's something that you eventually translate to every part of your life.
Absolutely.
How you do everything. It's
if you have a messy room at home, you're going to have a messy desk at work. Totally. Yeah. I'm with you on that. So I really appreciate this chat, Pat. I think this is honestly a good, you've given more in however long, 40 minutes or so, than I could have asked for. So thank you for the time. I do want to ask you one last question. Sort of a fun question I heard today by a sports psychologist by the name of Michael Gervais. If you could meet any famous person anywhere, some master of their craft in any field, whether it be baseball, what would be, and you only have 5 minutes, what would be the one thing you ask them?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I don't know if I have an immediate answer for you. The only thing that's popping into my mind, and I don't know why, is that I would want to see Ichiro for 5 minutes. And I would want to ask him. I've heard all these crazy stories about how every team he went to, he would order through the team like thousands of dollars in gym equipment, and he would never lift one weight. He would just stretch with this gym equipment. Apparently, he was insanely flexible.
Wow.
And so I would want to ask him, first of all, why not lift and why stretch? Like, what about it do you think it works so well? And does that in any way, like the stretching for hour or 2 hours on end for the day, does that contribute at all to how good you are as a hitter? Whether it's like the physicality of hitting and the flexibility of it, or does it put you in this relaxed state of mind all the time?
I was just going to say, I think there's something meditative about stretching, much people go.
Yeah, I think that's what I would want to get at. And I know we would only have 5 minutes. I would want to spend hours on end talking about it. But I would want to know if the stretching did anything for him mentally and what his goal was out of the stretching.
Like, was it intentional like that? Interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool. I like that. Wow. Well, on that note, Pat Geiger, first All-American in school history, and now future or current coach of Skidmore and future legendary coach. So I appreciate you coming on, man.
Appreciate it, Mike. Have a good one.
You too. We'll talk soon.